Hello, greetings everybody. My name is James. I am from the internet. Today we are going to be talking about manufactured sympathy. Now, we as a nation have been in varying states of lockdown for an entire year. And really, there have only been 2 points of consistency. Number one is that half the country consistently refuses to wear a goddamn mask, which is why we're still in this situation. Point number two of consistency is that every single month, more and more people continuously are driven to the point of financial ruin. And the only thing keeping that from happening is a loose patchwork assortment of moratoriums and government assistance programs that come and go and are sometimes reinstated and are sometimes rewritten and are sometimes allowed to fall by the wayside. But now that we're in 2021 and the pandemic response is going to end at some point this year, there has been a new point of consistency introduced in the national narrative. And this has been introduced by the fine, wealthy folk at CNN. So today, I want to take a look at CNN's newest attempt to drum up sympathy for the landlords and the investor class by the very people who are going to be put out onto the streets. I'm also going to explain to you why they're doing it. Here we go. Biggest trial of my life. Landlord says eviction moratorium has drained her savings. CNN's Natasha Chen looks at how the COVID-19 eviction moratorium has affected small-scale investors and landlords who have unpaid mortgages to face as tenants are unable to pay their rent.
This has been the biggest trial of my life.
Patricia Bowman says she hasn't received rent from her tenant in nearly a year.
I saw my savings dwindle down, month by month by month.
Small independent investors like Bowman own about 16.5 million single-family rental properties in the U.S., and a rough estimate from HUD suggests some 1.3 million of those mom-and-pop owners are now struggling to pay their mortgages due to missed rental payments.
So we open this story with a struggling middle-aged black woman declaring that this has been the struggle of her life. Not the struggle for equality, not the struggle to somehow escape the pitfall of not having access to intergenerational wealth. No. The largest problem, the largest trial that she has had to face is not getting paid rent from a tenant. So the two things that CNN wants you to know going in here is that, number one, landlords are not some evil, amorphous class of people living up in the clouds like the gods, sipping nectar and doing whatever the hell it is gods do. No. Landlords have a face, and it's a sweet woman who lives next door to you. Number two, there's 16.5 million people just like her. That's what CNN wants you to think. 16.5 million units owned by small investors, of which 1.3 million are in threat of having their investment property foreclosed upon, which is roughly 8%.
With the CDC moratorium on evictions during the pandemic, Bowman was stuck, unable to evict the tenant, but she finally got a court hearing in early February.
Ms. Bowman, judgment is in your favor for $7,650 plus court costs.
A judge in DeKalb County, Georgia, did order the tenant out in 7 days, with one catch.
After the writ has been filed, will the marshals still come out to actually do the eviction?
They will once the moratorium has been lifted by the CDC.
That's right. The sweet mom and pop landlord who's going through the trial of her life just won a court ruling for more than $7,000 from somebody who doesn't have a job and can't even afford to pay their current rent, let alone their back rent. And her primary concern is, when can the large men with guns come out and physically remove the person from the premises, take all their belongings and throw them on the sidewalk so that while the person is sitting there, I can then tap the for rent sign into the ground right behind that person and their pile of belongings standing out on the curb. curb. Yes, this is the person that you're supposed to feel sorry for. And not only her, but 16.5 million people just like her who are champing at the bit to make 16.5 million families homeless.
Biden's American Rescue Plan, now passed by the House, would extend the moratorium until the end of September. Her tenant hasn't left since the judge ordered him out, and this means he could stay in her house for another 6 months, even if he continues to not pay rent.
It's been like a perfect storm of events that have happened, and where I feel like now that, I am in jeopardy of losing my own residence.
Oh yes, now we get to the rub. This sweet woman, whose face is supposed to represent the face of 16.5 million small landlords just like her, is in threat of losing her own home. Why? Because she obviously owns a home and then said, hey, now I have this equity in this house. Instead of, enjoying the fact that I have a house, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and buy another property so that I can rent it out and extract wealth from somebody else who hasn't managed to save up as much money as I did. So she put up her own house as collateral in a risky investment just so that she could have the opportunity to leech money from other people without having to do any more work. This is where my sympathy train stops.
Bowman says her banks allowed her to put this house and her own home in forbearance. That means her mortgage payments may be on pause, but she'll still owe the money later. She could apply for rental assistance herself now that landlords are able to directly submit for the aid approved by Congress in December.
Sure, there's going to be like 20 million American families sleeping on the curb, but people who own second and third properties, whoa, we have to make sure they're taken care of. Why? Oh, I'm going to get to that in a second. But before I get to that, I just want to point out the shitty narrative that CNN is setting up here, which is sure, the landlords finally got billions of dollars in aid that they can dip their hand into. But of course, there's a catch, and that catch is inconvenient because, oh, those peasant renters, they're the problem.
But they still need the tenant to sign off.
I don't understand why I would need her approval to pay for the rent. I don't understand that.
Tina Brown says her tenant hasn't been paying rent, all while Brown lost her own job during the pandemic, temporarily moved in with her mother, then finally moved into the basement of her rental property right beneath her non-paying tenant.
Number one, here, I'll explain it for you. It's pretty easy. You need to have the tenant sign off on it to make it more difficult for landlords to just claim that their tenant isn't paying rent and get free money from the government. I thought all y'all capitalists were real fucking worried about that, people with an open hand in the welfare state and, taking advantage of government programs. Well, that's why that's in place. So shit-eating capitalists can't take advantage of the system. Gosh darn it, ain't that pesky. Number two, this building right here, yeah, I used to live here, okay? This is Queens. You see these buildings, these side-by-sides? Those were originally built as single-family dwellings about 70 years ago. There's a garage, there's a main floor, and then there's 2 floors of bedrooms. About 1,700 square feet. These units currently sell for approximately $1.6 million, and that's unrenovated from the 1950s when they were built. People buy these properties and split them up into 4 different apartments. They get $1,500 a month for the studio that they build in the garage. They get $3,000 a month for the main floor, and they get $2,000 a month for each of the top floors. Why? Because this is how much fucking rental units cost, because houses are overpriced, nobody can afford to buy, and everybody has to rent. So the very few people with a shit ton of money buy up the properties and keep renters as renters for life by creating artificial scarcity. But please, CNN, Tell me more how I'm supposed to feel sorry for the person who bought a $1.6 million property and is currently extracting $8,500 a month from 4 different families.
Being strapped financially, dealing with COVID, dealing with not knowing where you're going to live, and then also dealing with the possibility of losing your property. It's terrifying.
And now I'm going to get to this very last bit here that's probably the most important part of the whole damn thing. Investors are afraid of losing their property. The problem, it isn't their property. They have a mortgage. Ergo, it is the bank's property. You, as the landlord, merely exist to collect the rent and do maintenance on the property. Now, why does CNN care? Why does CNN want all these struggling small investors and landlords to stay in place? Well, that's pretty fucking simple. You see, if those 16.5 million rental units are all still owned by small investors when the moratorium is lifted and the mass evictions take place, right after that is the mass mortgage issue. And all of these people are going to lose their properties that they think they own that will revert back to the bank. However, the bank's not going to have to deal with evicting the tenants. The bank is not going to have to deal with the loss in the value of the property because their initial investment when they, quote, purchase the house with 10% down or 15% down is going to eat the loss. And people who own large corporations and sit on the board of directors of places at I don't know, CNN's parent company, well, these are people who own large portfolios, and those portfolios contain lots of rental properties. So if all 16.5 million of these investors are still in place, buoyed by a federal bailout, when the mortgage crisis hits, well then, the banks get 16.5 million properties dirt cheap. They don't have to eat any of the loss, and now all those wealthy people can buy all those properties up for pennies on the dollar, put it in their investment portfolio, and walk away with even more money. So maybe, just maybe, it's time y'all stopped believing the hype. The only reason that large capitalists go out of their way to try to make you feel sympathy for slightly smaller capitalists is because they're about to inhale them and they don't want to have to pay a steep price to do it. Nor do they want to deal with your attitude and bullshit after it happens. So they're going to keep greasing the skids to get you nice and soft to feel sorry for these people. Until next time, my name is James and I'm from the internet. I'm out. Peace.